Well, thank you so much and good day to all of you. I am so pleased to be here to be able to share some of the research-based findings of a recent workshop of the National Academies. I co-chaired this workshop with Bill Clark at Harvard, but also a steering committee of 7 Academy members. And I note here that they included both Carl Foke and Partha Dasgupta, who are speaking in this session. The purpose of the workshop was to update the scientific community on sustainability science. Let's see if I can move that forward. Could I advance the slides, please? Seems to not be working here. Could I have the next slide, please? If someone there can advance the slides, that'd be great. I'm having a hard time. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. The workshop goal was to update the scientific community on progress in sustainability science over the past decade or two. And we decided to focus on some cross-cutting themes that we agreed would be essential to efforts towards sustainability. And we wanted to share that not just with other scientists, but with decision makers. And that's very happy to be at this summit, and we'll look for other opportunities as well. The 6 cross-cutting themes or foci can be thought of as capacities that are necessary for pursuing sustainability, no matter which issue one is working on, climate change or the energy transition, poverty alleviation, food security, or other challenges. And I'm going to go through these one by one and highlight at least some of the take-home messages from each. But before I do that, I want to take a moment to second the message that Carl Foke sent to all of us, and that is that these decisions for sustainability are playing out in complex, intertwined nature-society systems. And if we forget that, we're not going to make very much progress. Social, technological, and natural elements of that complex system interact with each other. And interventions in one have unintended, sometimes, consequences in others. So embrace that complexity. And the good news is that we have frameworks for doing that. We're training our up-and-coming students to learn to be systems thinkers. And I think all of us need to be able to do that. But on to these, the take-home messages, the 6 capacities that we talked about at our meeting. First is the capacity for adapting to shocks and uncertainties. Research has shown that we're often trying to respond to multiple and interacting stresses, not just economic, but also social, political, cultural, and biophysical. And we need to draw on all of those resources in order to respond effectively. Ignoring that reality or assuming that parts of the system are static and other parts are changing will definitely limit the effectiveness of our actions to respond. And likewise, building up missing assets to help us build our capacity can help. The complexity of the situations that we're in also means that sometimes adapting in the short run successfully may be maladaptive in the long run. And what works in one place may not work in another place. And what adaptations at one scale may impede adaptations at other spatial scales. One of our participants at the meeting said that adaptive capacity includes the ability to make and remake relationships across biophysical and social parts of the system over time. And I think we are building the kinds of tools and approaches that allow that to happen. The second of the areas, the capacity for transforming systems, is likewise really important. While we can do adaptation and must do adaptation, I think it's quite likely that structural transformations will be needed in order for us to meet our basic needs going forward. We're beginning to have some basic understanding of what is needed to break down drivers of lock-in and the social, economic, and political drivers of that lock-in that we are trying to overcome. The importance of bottom-up experimentation as well as top-down policy interventions that help destabilize established regimes that we're trying to change and diffuse innovations. There's no doubt a lot more can be learned here, but the good news is we do have frameworks that help various actors, whether they're NGOs or governments or firms, understand the roles that they can play during the transformative process. And one really important finding of the workshop is that transformative change rests on the engagement of all kinds of participants, traditional and non-traditional. And we need to work together to imagine and create alternative visions. And the exciting thing is that there are processes now underway for communities and groups of people to do that. The next area, capacities for measuring progress. This is a hot topic and a challenging topic for scientists of all times, and it has been for decades. And it's clear that it is essential here. Our survey of the science recognized that there's considerable progress. We have some new tools, including remotely sensed tools and approaches, data sources for measuring and sharing information about various elements of this complex system, the natural capital, planetary systems, human health, consumption, production, and so forth, at a variety of scales. And at the same time, our panelists recognized that we are still far from having complete and practical measures of the whole system and of things that can tell us about sustainability into the future, rather than just about the current state of nature society systems. One set of metrics that does provide that more complete picture is the Inclusive Wealth Index. And I think it's the most important contribution of science to the pursuit of sustainability over the last several decades. And we have our colleague Partha Dasgupta and many others to thank for this. These metrics are now regularly tabulated and published by the UN and the World Bank and other organizations. And they focus on not just economics, but on the biophysical and manufactured and social and human assets of these systems. And they're mostly applied at national scales, but some at regional scales now. And I think expanding these approaches to the global scale on one hand and to local scales and corporate scales on the other is a top priority for sustainability science going forward. Capacity for governing is something that is changing rapidly. As I mentioned earlier, people and organizations have to anticipate and respond not just to a single problem in a single place at a single time with a single community, but rather to multiple changes and stresses all happening at once. And the research suggests that 20th century governance systems don't do this well, and that we can no longer just focus on individual issues, but we need to engage different people, different communities with different visions and values and capacities in decision-making together. So multiple new forms of cross-scale, collaborative, polycentric governance are now being tried around the world and tested and evaluated scientifically. And those, I think, will replace or at least extend the more typical top-down 20th century governance systems that we've all grown up with. The capacity to link knowledge and action is also critical. We know that the effectiveness of decision-making for sustainability is influenced by lots of different things, but there is no doubt that scientific knowledge can help. Unfortunately, that knowledge has too often been too little, too late, and sometimes not helpful at all on the wrong things. Research and practical experience over the last decade or two have clearly demonstrated the inadequacies of that pipeline or that loading dock approach to usable knowledge. These are approaches where the research community thinks they know what the questions are. They carry out research, they finish it up, and they put it out there hoping that some decision makers will use it. We have to get out of the ivory tower. A decade or more of research has shown that this doesn't work. This development of trusted and useful knowledge requires ongoing dialogue and communication and collaboration, and very often co-production that includes both researchers and decision makers. And we're learning how to do that, and how the importance of boundary spanning organizations, of decision support entities, And we're also learning how to do that at scales that will reach knowledge to a lot of different actors. And again, in that area, power matters. It's, who is in the conversation matters. The diversity of expertise and experience of the participants at the table actually, in the end, influences perceptions of fairness and credibility and usefulness. So these are important things for the research community to know. And again, we're training up a next generation of researchers who understand how to more effectively link with actors' action. But I think decision makers of all sorts also need to understand that. Now, finally, and I'll finish up here, sustainability really is all about fostering equitable improvements in the well-being of people today and over future generations. And that differentiates the pursuit of sustainability from other social goals. Justice, equity, fairness, and inclusion are essential for sustainability goals to be met. We now recognize the need to engage a broad range of actors, of different people and organizations, diversity of types of knowledge and ways of knowing and experience and values in order to work successfully towards sustainability solutions. And research and practice are devising different ways of actually doing that, of bringing that, of hearing all voices. But, participants at our workshop also suggested, and I agree with this, that among the 6 themes that we've discussed, this one may be the least well understood and developed. We repeatedly heard the words embrace plurality and equity in all of our sessions. And it remains, I think, for all of us to learn very quickly how to do so and apply that broadly in our pursuit of sustainability. So I want to thank you very much for listening. If you're interested in more information on these topics discussed at the workshop, much more depth on all of them, you can use these links. But meanwhile, thank you again for having us here.